So there's basically four major parts that get us from the point of, getting the accepted agreement of purchase and sale to I'm handing the keys over to my new renter. So if you go to the next slide, we'll start with what we call the pre-closing phase. Now, the pre-closing phase is really, before we get to closing, what are all the things that we need to do to get us set up so we're able to do, we're able to execute on construction when the time allows for it, right? So the first thing that we want to start off with, I just closed my screen by accident. First thing we want to start off with is what we like to call Power Day. And that is, everybody who has a stake in this project, getting them on site so they can see the things they need to see before we get further in the process. So what does that mean exactly? You're going to need, your team consists of a bunch of people. You need somebody to manage the project, a PM. And a PM is not simply like, oh, you've got X task due on X date, so you got to get it done. That's the very, very basics. Construction PMing is making sure that elements of the design process are considered to make sure you're achieving your goal. So it comes with a level of expertise in both construction as well as planning for these kind of projects. I'll give you an example. When we go get our drawings and the engineer comes back with suggestions as to, let's say, how to fix structural issues, somebody with good PMing knowledge can actually look at the structural drawings and say, hey, maybe we don't do it this way. Maybe, Mr. Engineer, can you help me figure out a different way to do this to potentially save costs on your project, or keep with what we're trying to achieve. Maybe it's an open plan that we're trying to achieve within that unit. And that's something that, somebody who's bringing construction PM expertise is able to do. So number one, your construction PM needs to be there. Number two, you need your architect, and your architect is actually a team. So it's not just one dude architect. It's you want the architect there so he can see as a vision, or her as a vision, what they want to do with the place. And then you also hopefully can do a site measure. The site measure is literally measuring out the building, every square inch of the building, to make sure that you have an accurate plan as to what the property looks like in its current state. Because that's going to be your template for all your other drawings that are going to come afterwards. The other thing you need is to make sure your general contractor's on there. So you can talk through the vision of the place, and your general contractor is going to start to get an idea of what he needs to, or she needs to do on this property, and can start developing in their heads a high-level price for you, right? The next thing that you want there as well is your designer. So this is not like HGTV, fluffy pillow type designer. This is a proper interior designer, a licensed interior designer who specializes in multifamily. So they understand space constraints, flows of areas that we're looking at, where we may want to carve out parts of, I don't know, bathrooms or closets, so we can add in powder rooms and increase the value and rents of the property. All these people you want to get into the property before you close, because they need to take those measurements. They need to look to see what they're doing. So that way they got some time. They need a couple of weeks to do that kind of work. So they can start figuring out, okay, architectural fees are going to be this much. GC renovation costs are going to be this much. PMing fees are going to be this much. And they can all just establish their quotations. The other thing that you want to get done, I'm getting a bunch of echo on the web, on the chat, Matt.
Oh. Okay, I just muted someone. Okay,
cool. Thanks. So the next thing you want to try to get done is surveys, and I talked about the site measure, but a survey if you need it. Most likely you need it. Most surveys that come with properties that you're buying are antiquated and don't give enough level of detail that we need to be able to do a fourplex or any sort of multifamily conversion. Old surveys are just very generalized. It's like, here's the property, here's the relative measurements. None of the additional legal information that we need is on there. So, who owns this right of way? How was it established? These are all actually parts of the survey. A survey is not just measuring out what's yours and what's what's your neighbor's. It's figuring out what are all the legal changes that have been made to establish things like right-of-ways or setbacks or who owns this piece of land. That's a very key part of the survey. We also want to add in, if we can, a couple of topographical measurements. It's not a full topographical survey, but we'll want to put in certain height measurements. So that way, if we decide, I don't know, to do a deck, or we want to check grading of the property, that all that information is in there in the survey. So you want to try to get your survey done as well before closing. And this is where it's really important to get a good surveyor. You don't want to get a cheap surveyor because it's very difficult to go back and add information. You're better paying top dollar for a great surveyor up front, getting everything documented properly, stamped with the surveyor's stamp, and then you can use that as a binding legal document as you go through the process. All this, we're doing all of this so that we can drive towards high-level pricing and conceptual drawings, right? So our high-level pricing is, hey, given the input from the PM, the architect, the designer, the GC can say, okay, you want to underpin, you want to extend the main floor, you want to add a new basement walkout, we're looking at 600, 700,000. Like, they can give you that high-level quote. Now, that high-level quote that the GC is going to give you is high level. For a GC to accurately quote you, they need more than that. They can't just walk through a place and give you a price. Any GC that does that is, GCs that do that, you'll run into problems as the project progresses because they haven't been able to actually see the bones of the house at that point. There's no drawings, there's no structural drawings. They don't know if they're specifying, 1 2x10 every 16 inches on center, or they're specifying, 20 10x10s every 12 inches on center. I could be talking about $10,000 in structural, I could be talking about $40,000 in structural. So until a GC gets full information, they can't accurately quote, but they should be able to develop at least a high-level quote based on experience at this point. That's kind of the pre-closing phase of things. Any questions on that before I move on to the next phase?
Do you want to comment quickly, even before pre-closing, so even before you acquire the property, what is it that you do? Like, do you do an on-site with consultation with experts, et cetera?
So once we have the APS or before the APS?
No, this is before you've even put it in the offer. You don't. So there's a step before this. I would say probably after. Maybe it's just not reflected here, but it's a step after. Ed talks about his checklist. That checklist gets us to a certain level of confidence. What's the next step? But before you put in an offer.
Right.
But before you put in the offer.
Yeah. So Ed and myself and Sam will try to establish like a high-level budget based on our experience, right? Because in order for you to create a pro forma and for you to do the financial analysis to see if this is the right property for you to do an offer in, you need to be able to work off something, right? So we have enough experience that we can look at a project, talk about as we're going through it, and say, okay, this is going to be roughly a $600,000 renovation. What we're talking about is roughly $600,000 renovation. So that way you can, and we'll work on this together, obviously, with our investor clients. You can then plug that information into your spreadsheets. We can plug into our spreadsheets and say, like, hey, this is $600,000 works out, or if we need to do $600,000, it's not going to be worthwhile for us to execute on this property. So we do that financial analysis before we put in that offer.
Yeah. And on-site consultations with architects?
Yeah, so sometimes, depending on the property, depending on the market, because sometimes the market's extremely fast. We've only got, 12 hours, 24 hours to react to a property. But if the conditions allow, we can bring an architect on site. Let's say, we want, this house only makes sense if we have laneway, if we can put a laneway suite on it, for example. Our architects will come out on site with us, look at the property and give their official evaluation at that point and say, okay, we're meeting the right kind of requirements for a laneway suite. We've got a 95% confidence that we can get a laneway suite here. And that is something that our architects can do. And it depends, like I said, if we have the luxury of being able to bring an architect through, if we have got the time to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's move on then to the next stage. So next stage is property closing. So at this point in time, we have kind of our high level, what we want to do with a property. And now we've got the actual property in our hands. So what do we do when we get one of these properties? We take a hammer and we start breaking things down. We need the property to be naked, right? Like we need to see what's under all those walls. We need that for a number of reasons. So we call it cosmetic demo. Cosmetic demo is like taking out all the drywall, all the flooring, so we can see all the structure, all the systems that are there. We can look for fire damage, water damage, problems with the structure as it exists. We pull all of that down, we strip the house as bare as we can, pre-permit, because you're allowed to take off drywall, right? We don't take out any walls themselves, and certainly nothing structural. But that gives us a, quote unquote, naked house. We know now what we're dealing with. And with that, now that we have the cosmetic demo completed, we can go into developing the detailed drawing set, like what we call an architectural drawing set. This part of the construction process actually takes quite a bit of time. A lot of people think once they've got the house, a couple of weeks, and they're submitting for permits. So that couldn't be further from the truth. The best projects are actually those that spend months in this stage, because we are creating a very good set of, electrical drawings, HVAC drawings, structural drawings. We're walking through, the design of the layouts. We're trying to solve all the problems in the virtual world in CAD first before we submit for permits. Because once we submit for permits, while we can still make permit updates, we can still do, scope changes, it's a lot more challenging too. And there can be downstream impacts, which we can't model easily because things are already live. So in something as complex as a 4-plex, or even more so in a 5 or 6-plex, this is where we'll spend a good chunk of time. Oftentimes we'll spend 3 to 4 months in this stage to come up with an excellent set of drawings, which have lots of things considered. We want to understand, what are the water systems we're going to use? Are we going with a tank? Are we going tankless? Because that can affect our floor plans. What kind of heating and cooling systems are we going with? Are we meeting air recirculation and fresh air requirements, which are especially important, in a kind of our post-COVID world? Are we doing structural drawing reviews? Have they considered, maybe the use of load-bearing walls instead of large spans, which can be very expensive? Once we've created all these drawing sets, so we've got, full structural drawings, we've got full HVAC drawings, we've got electrical drawing set, not as critical, but very nice to have. We've got an architectural drawing set. We can now actually price it, right? So you don't actually know the full accurate price of your renovation until you've got all these drawing sets, because a general contractor needs to look at your layouts and say, okay, you want, this open span, you want this additional window, you want underpinning, you want this staircase moved, you want all these things. That's, check mark cost, adding all that up. Without a detailed list of things and the finishes that you're potentially looking at. So let's say you want your flooring to be $10 a square foot, but you want your backsplash to be $20 a square foot. Without all that information on a detailed line by line basis, how could you quote, right? You can't actually generate an accurate quote. And you need drawing sets because you need to know, hey, my island is going to be 15 foot long, or hey, my island is going to be 2 feet long, right? Like those things will drastically change the costs of your materials. So it's not until you're into the project, at least 3 or 4 months, that you can start to get a very good sense as to the cost of the project. Let's see, where are we right now? So that gets us to the detailed budget and scope. Once we've got the detailed scope, which is literally, 100, 200 lines of every single thing that we're doing in the project, and we know what our budget is based on all the drawings and all the lines, we come together and we say, great, this looks awesome, let's go for it. And that takes us to the next slide, which is actually construction. Now, construction, so you can see that like 50% of this project has been not even, other than demo, like I'm not hammering any nails in, right? We spend a lot of time in the pre-closing and post-closing phase to get everything that we need, because now we start with submitting for a permit. And the way we do this is we submit for duplex permit first. So we're doing this as of right. We're looking to, like, who can we want to do an as of right.
I'm sure he's Spanish, right?
Oops. Wait.
I'm trying to see who it is.
Pardon?
Okay. Just muted Brenda. And I called Brenda out.
So basically what we're doing is we submit first for a duplex permit. So I want a 4-plex, I want a 6-plex. Why am I submitting a duplex permit? Well, in any property in Toronto, you can build a duplex, what we call as of right. So you don't need special permissions, you don't need committee of adjustments. Anybody's allowed to create a duplex as long as your house meets the requirements, right? Egresses, ceiling heights, fire separation, all the stuff that Ed has checked out for you, you can build a duplex. So we want to start construction. We spent the last 3 or 4 months planning. We want to get to construction now. So submitting a duplex permit immediately allows us to start construction phase. So we submit for duplex permit, we get that back, we start swinging the hammers, and we start with the actual construction of the project. The next thing that we do in kind of parallel with this is we submit for committee of adjustments if it's required. Most of the projects that we do, we're going to the committee of adjustments. So the committee of adjustments is basically a committee set up to look at variances to bylaws. So let's say, the bylaw says in your area, you can only build, 2,000 square feet based on the size of your lot. But we want to build a bigger house. We want to build 2,500 square feet. So there's a 500 square foot variance. We have to ask for permission for that. We have to go to committee of adjustments, right? And the committee of adjustments is the one that says yes or no to the variance that we're looking for. They'll base it on a whole bunch of things. Is it in line with the neighborhood, right? Or is what you're asking for in terms of this extra 500 square feet outrageous? Is every house on that street really, really tiny, but you're the only one building this massive house, right? So there's a bunch of, it's almost like case law. They'll look at the cases in the neighborhood to see whether or not the variances that you're asking for are in line and reasonable. Part of our experience, which is valuable, is we are familiar with the neighborhoods and what you can and cannot get away with. It's not 100% guarantee that you'll get passed at COA, but it's a hell of a lot better than having none of that and trying to pass at COA. So we get into, we do our COA submission. Usually we're asking, maybe it's more square footage, maybe your house is extra long, maybe it's a parking variance. Oftentimes we have to have a parking variance because parking requirements are quite strict, right? N-1, if we're building a 4 or 5-plex, who's got 4 parking spots in their downtown Toronto house? So again, based on our experience, we know areas, we know homes, we know neighborhoods that we have a better chance of getting that variance of parking, at the COA versus not being able to. And we also have architects that are experienced enough to present the arguments in the right way to get variances on things like parking. So anyway, once that's done, we actually get into the actual construction itself. That starts off with framing. So, if you're not familiar with what framing is literally the frame of the house. We do wood frame houses, this at the size and scale we're talking about. So we start off with something called structural framing, which is like, what is all the structure that's required? And then we move on to cosmetic framing, which is framing out the bathrooms and bedrooms and living spaces and things like that. If you go, we can jump to the next slide. And basically, at this point, we follow a pretty standard construction process. Now, we may be submitting multiple permits through this process, through each of the phases and each of the steps that we're going through. But it's, framing, fire separation inspections, rough-in plumbing, HVAC rough-ins, insulation vapor barrier. Like, you can go on the internet and search this stuff. City of Toronto has a set of inspections that they go through, and we're pretty much doing all of them because most of them will apply to our renovation, right? If we're doing underpinning, we have a foundational inspection, and we're just going through inspection by inspection, closing off the permits when we're done related to that, and then opening up new permits for the next phase of each project. And then we just rinse and repeat till we get to the point where the last permit gets closed off. We have our what's called our final inspection, and then my daughter's waving hi to me. We have our final inspection, and then we have occupancy, which means your wonderful tenants can now move in at that point. So yeah, that's kind of the construction process in a nutshell. Any questions about that? I know I talked like a lot, but this is a condensed version that Shelby so kindly put together for us based on like a 70-step detailed flowchart that we use, and that's also a high-level flowchart to help guide our clients through the process.
Ming, I just want to ask you a question. So why do you open and close so many permits? You said start off with a duplex, and then what's that all about? Yeah,
so basically, if you go and you buy a house and you say, I want to build 4 units, the City of Toronto will say, awesome. Here's your development charge. Here's your educational fee. Here's, I can't remember all the names of the levies. Yeah. So thank you. Please write us a check for $100,000, right? And these are absolutely good fees, but they're not meant for what we're doing. If you're building a condo, yes, there's development charges because a condo is putting a huge new strain on the area. Those development fees need to be pulled together because, the sewer systems need to be upgraded. The road systems now need to be upgraded. Electrical systems need to be upgraded to support a new condo build. But if you're turning a house and you're adding 1 unit, development charges were never intended, for just an additional unit. So what we do is we build it as a 2-unit property, and then we add on a unit and we make it 3 units, and that's a permit. And then we add on a 4th unit as just another permit. And we're doing an incremental process to add on these units. And I'm oversimplifying this because there's a ton of restrictions. Like, every subsequent unit must be smaller than the units preceding it. And, we have to make sure that we're showing proper fire separation and exits and entrances and egresses and fire refuges for each of these units. But we are doing it in a phased approach. So that way we're avoiding development charges because we are allowed to add incremental units. And it's not like this is some sort of, backdoor that we're, exploiting with the city. The city is well aware because when we go to committee of adjustments, we tell them what we're up to. We tell them we're trying to get to 4 units. These are the variances we're looking for, and we'll do it through a phased permit process. It's not, not something we're trying to hide. It is fully above board with the city, but the city understands that we are doing this process because development charges are meant for large buildings, which are actually putting strain on city resources. So they need those tax dollars so they can upgrade those city services. Any
Yeah.
other questions from anybody?
How much are development fees?
They vary. I think I heard $45,000 per unit.
Yeah, that was actually missing some. So basically, roughly speaking, for every 2-bedroom unit, you're looking, once you combine development charges like educational levies and the park levy, you're into about $60,000 per unit. So if you didn't know what you were doing and you thought, hey, you know what? I bought this house. I think it's great. I'm going to make this into a fourplex. I got my architect to drop fourplex plans. I submit them for permits. You get slapped with a roughly $180,000 development charge.
And it's not it's not because of like ill intent from architects, but most people don't know how to do this. I was working with a client recently. They had purchased a property. They love their architect because they're building a personal residence with this architect, and it's a beautiful personal residence. But they wanted to use them for multifamily, and their architect was telling them that there's absolutely no way you have to pay $200,000 in development charges, and we know we've done so many of these properties without paying development charges. So most people don't know how to navigate this process properly. Even amongst architects, it's a very, very small percentage. I would say that between me, Matt, Sam, and Ed, we probably know all the architects in Toronto that can do this properly, because it's only a handful. It's not because these architects they just don't know any better, because this is not their specialty.
Yeah, we have one of our clients, Daniel Wang, loves to tell the story of a guy on his road. So he bought a property. Down the road from him is a guy who got slapped with development charges, going from a single family to a triplex. And Daniel is working with us and avoiding those development charges. So yeah, people are getting slapped with them. This is a real thing. Yep. Anything else you want to talk, or any other questions? There's a Matt C here who DM'd us, but it's a good question, so I hope he doesn't mind, but I'm going to share it with everyone. He asked us directly: do you put all of your triplex mechanicals in your duplex drawings? Is it transparent to the inspector?
So So there's a couple of questions in that question. Do we put all the mechanicals on the permit set? No, because we're not going for a triplex immediately, right? So our mechanicals are only drawn out for the units that we're going for. The other units are empty, right? They're just rooms, right? There is empty space though left for mechanicals. Do we tell the inspector? Absolutely. Like from day one, it's, hey, Mr. Inspector, this is our plan. Right? This is what we're trying to do. Please evaluate us as if we were a multifamily. And this is very key, because I don't want him to evaluate me like I'm a duplex, because then he's not looking at fire separation that's required between the additional unit that's coming on later. Right? He's only going to look at fire separation required for a duplex. And then if I go to put in my third unit afterwards, and then he comes back and he's like, wait, you are missing fire separation, or I don't like the way that you guys did this, I got to tear it down and do it all over again. So it's really important at the beginning of the inspection process to develop a good relationship with that inspector and be transparent as to what you're up to. Remember, you're not doing anything illegal here. This is correct. And we tell our inspectors we're doing it as a duplex, and then we're going to close that duplex permit, and then we're going to open up one for a triplex, and we're going to close that, and we're going to open up one for fourplex. And have them be advocates for you through that process rather than the other way around.
Yeah, so everything's above board. We're not doing anything illegal. We're not doing anything shady. We're just doing things better.
I like the way that sounds, Matt.
Oh, yeah? TM.
TM.